This morning, you probably took a psychoactive drug. You called it coffee. Caffeine is a mind-altering chemical. It crosses into your brain, blocks the signals that make you sleepy, and changes how you feel. Billions of people take it every single day and think nothing of it. But here's what almost nobody knows. Humans have been deliberately altering their minds with plants for at least 8,000 years. That's before the pyramids, before writing, before the wheel. And here's the twist. For almost all of that time, these substances weren't entertainment. They weren't a party. They were something else entirely, something we've almost completely forgotten. So when did it actually start? And what were drugs originally for? The answer changes everything we think we know about how old this really is, what our ancestors were actually doing, and why modern science is quietly circling back to where they started. Let's start with how old, because the age of this story is the reason nothing else about it makes sense until you know it. For a long time, the assumption was simple. Drugs were a side effect of civilization. First came farming, then cities, then surplus, then leisure, and somewhere in there, people finally had time to get intoxicated. The dirt says otherwise. In the Nanchoc Valley of northern Peru, a team led by anthropologist Tom Dillahay of Vanderbilt University spent years excavating the floors of ancient houses. In 2010, in the journal Antiquity, they published what they found pressed into those floors. Chewed coca leaves, 8,000 years old. And right beside the leaves, something even better. Burned and scraped pieces of calcium-rich rock. That detail matters because coca leaf on its own gives you almost nothing. You have to chew it with a pinch of alkaline ash to unlock the active compound. That's a chemistry trick, a technique. So 8,000 years ago, people who had barely begun farming already knew a 2-ingredient chemical extraction, and some sites seem to have specialized in making the ash. Somebody was supplying it. And this isn't just a South American story. Opium poppies show up at Neolithic sites in Europe, thousands of years before Rome. Cannabis was in the ground across Asia, deep into prehistory. Nearly every region of the world, as far back as archaeology can see, humans found the plants that alter the mind. Every time. Wherever we went, we looked. This was not a side effect of civilization. It was already with us when civilization started. Which raises the real question. Why? If life was that hard, that close to the bone, why spend precious effort on plants you can't eat? Because they weren't using them the way we assumed at all. But the assumption is understandable. Look at our world. Alcohol at parties, caffeine for work. We use substances for pleasure and productivity. So we imagine the past did too. Then archaeologists started doing chemistry on ritual objects, and a completely different picture came out of the lab. In 2019, in the mountains of southwestern Bolivia, researchers analyzed a small leather bundle found in a cave called Cueva del Chileno. It was about 1,000 years old, and it was a shaman's kit. Carved wooden tablets, a snuffing tube, and a pouch stitched together from 3 fox snouts. A bioarchaeologist named Melanie Miller ran the pouch through mass spectrometry, a technique that can identify invisible traces of chemicals. It came back positive for at least 5 psychoactive compounds from multiple different plants. Cocaine's parent alkaloids, bufotenine, and the 2 chemicals that stunned everyone, DMT and harmine. Here's why that pairing matters. DMT and harmine are the 2 key ingredients of ayahuasca, one of the most powerful visionary brews on Earth. DMT alone doesn't work when swallowed. Your stomach destroys it. It only works if you combine it with a second plant containing harmine, which shuts down that digestion. 2 unrelated plants from different environments that do nothing special apart and open a door together. 1,000 years ago, someone in the Andes had that combination figured out and carried the ingredients in a fox snout pouch, not in a tavern, in a ritual bundle, in a cave with ceremonial tablets. The same year, another lab confirmed the pattern on the other side of the planet. At a cemetery called Jirzankal, high in the Pamir Mountains of western China, archaeologists found wooden braziers in 2,500-year-old tombs. A team led by Yi-Min Yang at the Chinese Academy of Sciences tested the charred residue inside them. It was cannabis, and cannabis unusually high in THC. People had placed hot stones in the braziers and burned it, in tombs, during funerals. The researchers concluded it was likely used to communicate with the dead, possibly accompanied by music. Stand at that graveside for a moment. You're in the Pamir, 2,500 years ago, at 10,000 feet, where the air is thin and the cold gets into everything. Someone you love is in the ground. The stones go into the fire until they glow, then into the wooden brazier, onto the plant. The smoke comes up into the circle of mourners, and somewhere behind it, someone is playing music. And in that thin air, with that smoke in your lungs, the line between this world and the one your father just left feels, for 1 hour, crossable. That's not a party. That's the oldest funeral technology we've ever found. Do you see the pattern? The Bolivian pouch was a shaman's. The Chinese cannabis was in graves. Coca in the Andes was woven into work and ritual life. Across the ancient world, mind-altering plants show up in one context again and again, the sacred one. These weren't party supplies. They were technology. Technology for the hardest problems humans have. Talking to gods, facing the dead, standing at a graveside and needing, somehow, to cross the distance. There's even a fossil of this idea preserved in your own mouth. The word ecstasy comes from the Greek ekstasis. It literally means to stand outside yourself. The ancient world had a word for leaving your own mind, because leaving your own mind was a recognized destination, a place you went on purpose, with guides, on the most important nights of your life. So what happened? How did sacred technology become a Saturday night? The short version, the ritual died and the chemical remained. Empires and missionaries stamped out the old ceremonies. Trade turned sacred plants into commodities. Chemistry concentrated them into pure powders, far stronger than any leaf. By the 20th century, the substances had been stripped of every guide, every ceremony, every purpose except the feeling itself. And in that form, they did real damage. And one by one, most of them were banned. The oldest tools in the human toolkit became contraband. And that seemed like the end of the story. But here's the part nobody talks about. The story reopened, and of all places, a hospital. In 2006, a researcher at Johns Hopkins named Roland Griffiths ran a study that would have sounded insane to any regulator a decade earlier. Under careful clinical conditions, with trained monitors in the room, he gave volunteers psilocybin, the compound in so-called magic mushrooms. Then he followed up for months. The results made scientific history. Most of the volunteers had what the study classified as a complete mystical experience. And when asked to rate it months later, participants ranked that single session among the 5 most spiritually significant experiences of their entire lives, alongside the birth of a child, alongside the death of a parent. 1 dose, in a hospital room. And modern, screened, sober-living Americans came out describing the same territory that shamans in Bolivia were navigating with a fox snout pouch 1,000 years ago. Griffith's study relit an entire field. Today, versions of these compounds are in major clinical trials for depression and end-of-life fear, wrapped in preparation, guidance, and integration, which, if you squint, is just the modern word for ritual. Screened travelers, a trained guide, a journey with a purpose. We are slowly, carefully, rebuilding the thing we spent centuries dismantling. So picture the whole arc. A farmer in Peru, 8,000 years ago, chewing coca with a pinch of burned ash. A chemistry trick older than writing. A funeral in the freezing Pamir. Smoke rising from a wooden brazier. The living sending words to the dead. A shaman's pouch, holding a 2-plant key that unlocks a door in the mind, and a hospital room in Baltimore, where a volunteer opens their eyes and calls it one of the most meaningful days of their life. Tomorrow morning, you'll take your drug. Hot, roasted, poured in a mug. The last socially acceptable survivor of humanity's oldest habit. 8,000 years of reaching for the sacred, and what's left on your counter is a cup that helps you answer email. And most of us never even knew there was more.